But what if Mr. Worthington stalked out one night angry and ashamed? Eyes closed, his mother's head lolled to the side. She still held the half-burning cigarette. He didn't understand how she could lie in bed 15 hours a day and be so tired. He didn't want to consider what she might be tired of. "Ma," he said, giving her a nudge. She jerked awake in time to fleck the long ash into the ashtray. She took a final drag before crushing the cigarette out. She picked up the remote. She was proud of that remote, her first ever, and muted the sound, then stretched on her side, facing him, and closed her eyes. His body made a subtle shift, preparing to crawl off the bed as soon as she fell asleep. He had homework to finish and a box of macaroni and cheese to make for dinner. They still had the old black and white TV in the living room, and Mr. Worthington had told them to watch the news one night this week and write down what every story was about and how long it lasted. Even though it was only Tuesday and he rarely did homework early, he thought tonight might be a good night. His mother sighed. He felt the mattress prepare to give up his weight. Then a hand touched him. "Don't go," she said, her hand raising the quilt as if she expected him to burrow beneath it. He resettled, and she wiggled closer. "Here," she said, like this, and she coaxed him onto his side, his back to her, and then snuggled up tight against him. "Just let me rest like this for a minute," she said. "It's so hard for you, Mother, sometimes, honeysuckle. Everything hurts." He hadn't thought of her being in pain, and he wondered if she should go to the clinic. "I get so lonely," she said. "Let me lie here, and then I'll get up and fix us both a nice dinner. You're such a big young man." She pinched the muscle in his arm. "So strong, and I'm so tired." Although she was tight against him, he couldn't feel much except her bulky clothing. Still, the warmth of her made him perspire. When he drew the quilt clear, the cool air helped him breathe. The darkness had settled completely now, except for the flashing colored lights of the muted television. He knew this show, Jeopardy! If he twisted his head, he could read the answers, but with the sound turned off, he could never find out what the questions were. She nudged him onto his back and laid her cheek on his chest. After a while, he felt a spot of wet on his shirt. Her breathing was regular, although every once in a while a little moan escaped her, and she shifted, burrowing into him more tightly. He read the final Jeopardy answer, but nobody got the question right, and he couldn't hear Alex tell them what they should have written. The news came on. If he could have seen the clock, he could have timed the stories. Maybe he'd be able to guess what they were about, even without sound. The arm his mother lay on grew numb. When he tried to move, she moved too, and then he found himself moving in a different way. She slid off his arm, which tingled with relief, and then, without quite knowing how, she was on her back and he was hovering above her, not moving so much as being moved, and he remembered how Ken, of all people, college professor, had taught him to throw a baseball by wrapping Mannion's hand around the ball and then wrapping his own hand around Mannion's. "Baby," his mother said. She kissed him and guided him. His lungs hurt, but it was hard to distinguish what he felt because there was so much to feel, and because all the while there was this other Mannion sitting on a shelf in the air above the bed. And he had a crazy thought that if he could just convince this other floating Mannion to look at the television, he might still be able to catch the news. Afterwards, he felt like he was lying on a raft adrift in the ocean. "Good night, baby," his mother whispered. After that, he came home from school and found her crying sometimes, sitting at the kitchen table. "Come on, you need to lie down," he said, and led or carried her into the bedroom. He rarely stayed long. It was like a treatment to get her through the worst so she could sleep. At school, he slacked off homework, skipped when he felt like it. He started smoking cigarettes. Mr. Worthington yanked him aside one day after lunch, and in the shadowed hallway said, "Since when did you start smoking cigarettes?" "I don't," Mannion said, although he had an open pack in the pocket of his jeans. "I saw you walking through town. It wasn't me, I swear. It sure looked like you. It must have been somebody else. You don't smoke?" Years later, Mannion would wonder if the look his memory conjured in Mr. Worthington's eyes was really there, or if his imagination had constructed it later. The challenge, the threat. "I'll give you this," it said, "if you must have it, but it will cost you everything." "No," Mannion said, "that's crazy. What do you mean? Of course I don't smoke." And the last, A breezeless summer night, his mother propped on pillows, the sheet beneath her wrinkled and damp with her sweat and tears. A mound of balled-up tissues cluttered her bedside table. He tried to think of them as flowers, but they looked obscene. He waited by her bed, holding an empty grocery bag into which he'd stuff those tissues once she fell asleep. Her body was surrounded by pillows, one long clutched like a lover in her arms. When her eyelids closed, he scooped the tissues into the bag. They felt slimy, and he was surprised how much noise a plastic bag could make. Through the window, he could see the washed-out watercolor sky, the heat so strong it had blanched all color from the world. He'd set up a fan for her on a chair at the foot of the bed, but she claimed the pressure of the moving air hurt too much. Everything hurt her now. Her body had no flesh, even though her chest and face were bloated like someone had stuck in a needle and inflated her. Her hair all gone, but for the few tufts scattered around her scalp like tumbleweeds across the desert. The soft pink cap, the only color left, lay wedged beneath a pillow. She wore it only because she knew he ached, remembering her hair. He spent every day and night with her. At school, they promised to pass him if he wrote a few papers. They didn't want him any more than he wanted them. He hadn't started the papers, although he knew he should have turned in one by now. He sat in front of the open kitchen window and listened to the crickets, to the rare, gravelly crunch of a car passing their patch of land, coming down Rattlesnake Hill or going up. Teenagers probably looking for a place to park. Sometimes he remembered the bald man in the plaid shirt who beat his mother. He pictured the man showing up at their door, awkwardly bathed and sweet-smelling, holding flowers, hungry and apologetic. In his imagination, the bald man knelt on the steps as Mannion whipped forward his foot in steel-toed boots and connected with bone-crushing satisfaction. He told the bald man, "You gotta bleed to come in here." He remembered, too, the time she used to pick him up at school, parking her little Chevette along the street and getting out to stand beside her, wearing her impossibly tight short shorts, big sunglasses, scarf over her hair, a man's shirt open in front to reveal her lacy bra, and little pink sandals, her toenails also pink. He was the envy of every male in school, and as he reached her, sometimes she'd hug him and lift him and twirl him, and he would laugh at all the adolescent boy mouths drooling over her as she turned her back on them and sashayed her hips, pushing her butt back just a bit to make sure that as long as they lived, those boys would never forget that sight. He washed dishes, poured a whiskey, lit a cigarette. He wouldn't smoke in her presence because all the smoke she'd inhaled all those years had made her sick today. Even so, when she was sharp, she could smell it on him, and sometimes she asked him to give her one. He gave in once, figuring why not, but the coughing it brought on raked her raw. He cared for her through August, waking up to worry every once in a while about those papers he failed to write. The school passed him anyway, and still he quit. His birthday and his mother's burial coming so close together, he knew he'd never remember one without the other. Afterwards, there was nothing left but to leave. Where he landed or how he survived doesn't matter. There is always work for a man who will do anything. He met a woman or two or three, but it always ended badly. And he found himself wondering if not his mother, but the love itself was to blame. He knew he could never love that way again, and yet he did not know how to love differently. Did that mean that there would never be a time he wasn't alone? But there's a lifetime left for him to wonder that. For this one night in Skowhegan, he has his mother still, and finishing his whiskey and cigarette, he turns off the kitchen light and returns to her room. She has managed to wriggle to the center of the bed, leaving enough space for him to climb in beside her. She remains turned away, and he is careful not to touch her, because even the slightest bump will make her flinch in pain. Even so, untouched, she will sometimes hiss through clenched teeth, and his eyes will fill with moisture, not because she is dying, and without her his whole world will be empty, but because she is his mother, and everything hurts. Thank you.